first off, I find James Comey to be someone who was one of the most meticulous manipulators of media coverage that we have had in Washington in a very long time. He was someone who knew how to feed narratives and engage in spin. It would be particularly, I think, humorous for this to be the thing that eventually tripped him up, because he seemed to be very careful about having kind of cutouts all along the way of getting his story out there. But I also think that one of the things that we can look back in this moment is, you actually need to restore faith in the types of individuals who are in these jobs going forward. The American people deserve that. And I don't think that James Comey exited his office or went through this process without losing the faith, not just of Republicans, I should say, but Democrats as well, for the way that he would engage in personal spin, trying to cast himself time and again as being the heroic sort of, stalwart figure and ramrod straight FBI agent and the like along the way. I don't know how this is going to play out. I am not surprised by this indictment. I actually believe that the odds favor a conviction in this moving forward. And even though I think there's hesitation about this case for all the obvious reasons, I would not be surprised if he ends up being convicted on at least one of these counts.
It is the Martha Zoller Show. I'm here with Chandelle Summer. And, of course, the news kind of as expected to come was the indictment of James Comey. They were coming up on a 5-year statute of limitation because if you are charged with perjury, which is, what they got Bill Clinton on was perjury for lying to Congress, you have a 5-year statute of limitations. And earlier this morning, I was listening to kind of the question back and forth that triggered this. This was back in 2017. Andrew McCabe, Chandelle, Andrew McCabe had come in and testified, and he had said that he had been authorized by James Comey to leak information to the New York Times, and that was his testimony under oath, okay? And then Comey was asked under oath, you said that you never authorized anything like this to be leaked to the press. Who's telling the truth here? And he said he was telling the truth. Corbin McCabe says he was telling the truth. But we do also know that things were leaked from the FBI to the New York Times because they have said that they got information from the FBI. The New York Times has. So, I kind of like in my FBI director, Comey's like my least favorite FBI director of the last number of years. I really liked the last one, Chris Wray, even though, I think he was always calm, cool, and collected, and he seemed like he was a real lawman type, Mueller, I think, was good. I think that Kash Patel is going to be good. He hadn't been in the job long enough to know, okay? But Comey has always seemed to me, and I want to know what you think about the case as well as what I'm about to say. Comey has always seemed to me as he was more in it for himself, and he had a much more of an ego. I'm sure all these guys have egos, but his ego seemed to me to be more on display.
I disagree. I certainly think the worst FBI director of all time is maybe Kash Patel.
Well, you don't know yet.
Because he kowtows to the will of the president in terms of prosecuting people who the president dislikes, which I think is absolutely a violation of the oath of office. In the past, the FBI has always been kept separate from the executive branch, and they've been an independent agency. And in fact, the reason Comey got on the wrong side of Donald Trump in the very beginning is because of his refusal to just wipe away the charges against Michael Flynn, who had made statements or had negotiated with some Russian diplomats and then lied about it to Congress. A very clear-cut lying to Congress type of situation. This case is weak at best. In fact, the grand jury dismissed count 3, which is almost unheard of for a grand jury to reject charges that the prosecution brings to them. The difference between a grand jury indictment and a conviction is the difference between maybe and absolutely. Maybe is what the grand jury is tasked with determining, probable cause. And then when you get to a trial, the burden shifts to the government to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. So you've got to show pretty much absolutely somebody did something intentionally. And in this case, you've got a charge of making a false statement to Congress. And they have to show that he knew it was false when he made it, and that the intent was to mislead. Interestingly, he does not have to be under oath, which is the difference between perjury and making a false statement to Congress.
Well, absolutely. And I think that, he was under oath in Congress.
He was, though, yes.
Yeah, and I think that the question about whether he was leaking sensitive information to the press, it is, a serious question, because you have one person, Andrew McCabe, who said, yes, I was authorized by Comey to do this. And then Comey saying, no, I never participated as being an anonymous source or helped with anything like that. That's what he said. So if McCabe's telling, and this is going to be the question, if McCabe's telling the truth, then Comey's lying.
Not necessarily. Both things could be correct at the same time. In fact, James Comey, when he testified, may not have known that, or it could have happened that they were referencing a point in time before that happened.
Well,
so there's lots of nuances to this. It's not just that easy to say, if he said this, he's okay. Wrong, and vice versa.
Look, I'm not a lawyer, you are, and that's fine. But I think what's so funny is that I think a lot of people have this kind of romanticized view of the FBI, that it used to be so good and now it's not. And I just think that's not true, and I'll tell you why. That for most of the FBI's history, they were controlled by a real tyrant, J. Edgar Hoover, who was doing investigations on all kinds of people and who was bringing them in. For most of their history, they had a person like that, and who was bringing people in, showing them files, going, hey, if you don't do what I want you to do, I'm going to release all this stuff about you. And he did it to presidents. He did it to people like Martin Luther King Jr. He did it to Bobby Kennedy. He did it to lots of people, okay? And then since then, we had an FBI that did not listen to people in the field that saw hijackers learning to fly but did not want to take off or land. And when the area people from Arizona, which is where they were training, tried to get it up the chain, they were squelched, because the bureaucracy that forms around any agency that becomes permanent. And this is, me, just one of my little pet peeves, is that once you have a building built with your name on it and you become a bureaucracy like that, you start trying to protect that bureaucracy. So for the period of time from about 1990 to the horrible day on 2001, the FBI was terrible. Okay, they didn't trust women that they had hired. The whole reason why they didn't listen to this report that came up from Arizona was because it was a female agent. So this romantic view that the FBI has never been the kind of agency to do the wrong thing is just not true.
I agree with you. And certainly the 9/11 debacle is a good example. Of course, that was a Republican administration at the time.
No. For 7 months, okay? The people that set the table for what happened was under Clinton. The report was made under Clinton. It was going on for years. Okay, so it's not Republican or Democrat.
Well, it is.
Okay,
it's not. Welcome to the Civil War. I mean, this is, you take out our people, we take out your people. I mean, during the last administration.
Who's taken out anybody?
Well, and when I say take out, I certainly don't mean that in a violent way. What I'm saying is you prosecute people from this administration, and then when we get in power, we're going to prosecute people from your administration. So all of these people making these decisions are putting themselves at risk, as far as I'm concerned. And it's just going to be tit for tat, and it's getting worse. And the emotions involving this indictment against James Comey are strong. I mean, I watched TV last night and watched all the political shows to see what the temperature was, and it's, predictably, you have people on Fox saying one thing, which support the administration, and you have people on CNN saying,
thing about it is
this is crazy.
But the people with Trump derangement syndrome, and I think I see Trump for who he is, okay? But, all you got to point to is the fact he did not prosecute Hillary Clinton. He, in fact, said, don't prosecute Hillary Clinton. Okay? She did more.
That was before
stuff.
All of the prosecutions against him.
Well,
that's what's fueled all this.
But she hasn't done it
Talk
now.
About Trump derangement. He's like criminal defense derangement syndrome. He cannot get over the fact that he was prosecuted for these crimes. And so, therefore, everybody else is going to suffer too. He wants everyone to feel his pain.
See, I think you're just expanding that there's no real evidence of that. I think Comey deserves to be indicted because I think he did commit perjury, because in his little book, he said that he cooperated with this New York Times reporter.
There's nothing wrong with cooperating with a New York Times reporter.
Nothing wrong with it. But
they can give out information.
You didn't.
They can give out information to the press, right? There's nothing that prohibits the prosecutor or anyone else from giving out information. So, and if they want to do it as an unnamed source, there's nothing wrong with that.
I don't disagree.
So that's why there's no motivation for him to lie about that. If he wanted to say, I gave out information, he can do it.
He said in his book that he did, but in front of Congress, he said he didn't.
Well, again, you haven't really gotten the background, the context, or the nuances of that particular discussion. And I doubt very seriously that they're going to ever get a conviction. It may get thrown out on a summary matter.
Look, I trust the judicial system, and that's fine. But the fact of the matter is, Chandelle, he wrote in his book after the testimony, the book came out after the testimony, that he cooperated with the New York Times and he was sometimes an anonymous source. He wrote that in his book. Under oath to the Congress, he said, no, he didn't do that.
That's not what he's being prosecuted for, first of all, is giving information to the New York Times.
No, I know that. He's being prosecuted for lying in front of Congress.
Correct. And you don't know the context in which he made that statement. And that's why I'm saying hold judgment.
Okay.
Convicting him on a radio talk show is the worst thing that can happen.
I'm not going to convict him, but I don't think he's listening to me, nor is anybody else. But I'm talking about in D.C. or anything like that. My whole thing is that I think he was a sleazy person. He was a bad FBI director from the beginning. I'm not saying that means he deserves to be in jail or anything like that. But if you look at him, I mean, he's kind of up there. I think he wanted to be like J. Edgar Hoover. I think I would love to, if I ever got to ask him a question, I would love to say, did you just want to be like J. Edgar Hoover, where you had all the files and you controlled everything? That's what it looked like to me. And the reason why I think I'm being genuine about this is because I don't care. What I like about the FBI directors is they have terms that go beyond the length of whoever president appoints them. So they're roughly less political. They're supposed to be, but everybody in Washington is political.